Some debts aren't paid in money. That was the first thing Aldous Vane said to her stepfather, and the last thing Mira heard before the door to her old life closed forever. She hadn't been asleep when they came for her. That's what nobody ever asks, whether the girl knew. Mira had been sitting at the kitchen table at 11:43 at night, the same table where she'd eaten cereal alone every morning since she was 9 years old, running the household accounts on a yellow legal pad because the laptop's battery had given out 3 months ago and Gerald hadn't bothered to replace it. She heard the cars first. 2 of them, engines too quiet for the neighborhood, tires on gravel that Gerald had never gotten around to repaving. She heard the knock. Not a bang, not a pound, just 3 measured raps, the kind that didn't need to be loud because whoever was knocking already knew the door would open. She heard Gerald's voice drop to something she'd never heard from him before, pleading. Mira set down her pencils. She looked at the column of numbers she'd been working through, the electric bill, the water bill, the 3 credit card statements that had been arriving in envelopes with red borders for the past 2 months. Gerald had given her the stack 2 weeks ago with a shrug and said, "Figure it out." She always figured it out. She'd been figuring it out since her mother died and left her here, in this house, with this man who had no use for a stepdaughter, except as someone to cook, clean, and keep the books straight. She didn't run. Later, she would try to explain this to people, and they would look at her like she was broken. Why didn't you run? The answer was simple and ugly. Where would she have gone? She had $43 in a checking account. She had a part-time job at a copy shop that paid $11 an hour and gave her 20 hours a week if she was lucky. She had no car. She had the clothes in her closet and the legal pad on the table and a very clear understanding, built over years, that nobody was coming to help her. So when Gerald appeared in the kitchen doorway with a man she'd never seen before standing behind him, Mira looked up from her numbers and waited. "This is her," Gerald said. He didn't look at her when he said it. The man behind him, tall, dark coat, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from calm but from complete control, stepped around Gerald like he was furniture. He looked at Mira the way she imagined an appraiser looked at property, measuring, cataloguing. Not cruel exactly, just precise. "Stand up," he said. She stood, not because she was frightened, she was, but fear had never been the thing that moved her, but because she wanted a better look at him. She wanted to understand what exactly she was dealing with. He was older, mid-40s maybe, a face that had been arranged by hard years into something that wasn't quite handsome and wasn't quite harsh, just permanent, a jaw like a piece of architecture, eyes so dark she couldn't find where the iris ended, a scar that ran from his left ear to his chin, faded silver against brown skin, the kind of scar that had healed a long time ago and had stopped bothering its owner even longer ago than that. His name, she would learn, was Vane. Just Vane, the way some men are just one thing. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at Gerald. "The debt was $80,000, he said. "I'm taking the girl, we're even." Gerald nodded so fast it was obscene. Mira picked up her legal pad. She picked up her pencil. She looked at Gerald, really looked at him, probably for the last time, wanting to see if there was anything in his face she'd missed in all these years of living with him. There wasn't. There was just relief. Pure, animal relief, the kind that doesn't leave room for anything else. "Don't touch my things," she said to him. "The green folder on the counter has all the account information. If you can read, you'll be fine." Gerald opened his mouth. Mira walked past him, past Vane, and out the front door. She stopped on the porch. The 2 cars were black, engines idling. Men stood at the periphery of the driveway, not moving, watching the tree line the way soldiers watch. The night air was cold enough to see her breath. She had no coat. Vane came out behind her. He stood for a moment, then walked to the first car and opened the rear door. "Get in," he said. "Where are you taking me?" He looked at her over the roof of the car. Something shifted in his face, not quite surprise, but an adjustment, like a man recalculating a figure that had come out different than he expected. "Somewhere warm," he said. It wasn't much, but it was more than Gerald had ever offered her. She got in. The house was 40 minutes outside the city, set back from a road she didn't recognize, behind gates that closed behind them with the sound of finality. It was not what she'd expected. She hadn't known what she expected. A warehouse, maybe, something dark and cinematic, but not this. A house that was old and large and lit from inside with the amber warmth of a place that had been lived in for a long time. Gardens that were dormant now, in late autumn, but were clearly tended to by someone who cared. A front door with a brass knocker shaped like a lion. She was shown to a room on the second floor by a woman named Pesha, who said almost nothing but laid out towels with the efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times. The room had a window that overlooked a garden and a bed with 4 posts and a desk with a lamp. Mira sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands. She was not naive. She understood in a general way what it meant to be handed over by a man to another man as payment for a debt. She had read enough, seen enough, structured enough numbers in her life to understand that she had just entered a ledger as an asset. The question was, what kind? She didn't sleep much. At 4 in the morning she got up and sat at the desk, and because she had nothing else to do and her brain refused to stop moving, she began making a list. What she knew, what she didn't know, what she needed to find out in the morning. A tray appeared outside her door. Coffee, eggs, toast, a newspaper from the actual world, folded in thirds. She ate, she read, she waited. At 10 o'clock a man knocked and said that Vane would see her now. His office was on the ground floor, a room lined with books that had actually been read. She could tell by the way they sat on the shelves, uneven, some slightly splayed, the kind of disorder that comes from use. Maps on the walls, not decorative. Actual maps with actual markings. A desk that was wide and dark and stacked with papers organized in a way that looked chaotic but probably wasn't. Vane was standing by the window when she came in. He didn't turn around right away. "Sit," he said. "I'll stand," Mira said. He turned around then. Again that adjustment in his face. Whatever he was used to, it wasn't this. He studied her for a moment. "You know what your stepfather owed me." "I figured it was money," she said. "Given that he sold a person to cover it, I'm guessing it was more money than he could pull together any other way." $80,000, Vane said. "Borrowed over 14 months, never paid back a cent. That sounds like Gerald. I've taken people before," he said, and the way he said it was neither proud nor apologetic, just factual. "To work off debts, the arrangement is simple. You work, the debt decreases. When the debt is clear, you leave." Mira looked at him. "What kind of work?" "I have a problem," Vane said. He moved to the desk and turned a folder toward her. Inside was a spreadsheet printed on 4 pages, dense with numbers, columns that didn't reconcile, footnotes that contradicted the headers. She looked at it for 30 seconds. "Your accounting is wrong," she said. "I know. Not wrong like someone made a mistake. Wrong like someone is taking from you and has been for a while." A long pause. "Yes. How long have you known?" 6 weeks. How long has it been going on?" "I don't know. That's the problem." Mira looked at the spreadsheet again. She looked at the maps on the walls. She looked at Vane, this man who had taken her from a kitchen table and driven her 40 minutes into the dark and now stood in front of her with a financial leak he couldn't locate and a face that gave nothing away. "I want a real desk," she said. "Not the one upstairs, something larger. And I need access to every ledger. Every record, every receipt going back 3 years. If someone is bleeding you, the evidence is in the numbers, it always is." Vane was quiet for a moment. "You can do that?" "I've been doing it since I was 15, she said. "Someone always needs the numbers read." He looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once, the way a man nods when he's made a decision he won't reverse. "Get to work," he said. She found the first discrepancy on the 3rd day. It was in the import records. A series of shipping invoices that reconciled on the surface, but didn't match the weight manifests filed with the freight company. Someone had been skimming from cargo clearance. Small amounts, never more than 3,000 at a time, always attached to a legitimate transaction. The kind of thing that would take years to notice if you weren't specifically looking for it. She put it in a folder. She kept looking. The second discrepancy came from payroll. Ghost employees. Names on a list that appeared in one set of books but not in the personnel files. 6 names. She cross-referenced the bank routing numbers and found that 3 of them led to the same account, buried under 2 shell transfers. She put it in a second folder. By the end of the first week, she had 4 folders. By the end of the second, she had 7. Vane came to the office he'd given her, a room off the main hallway, bigger than her room upstairs, with a long table she'd covered in paper, every evening at 8 o'clock. He never announced himself. He never asked how it was going. He stood in the doorway, looked at what she was doing, and either left or stayed. The first night he stayed, he poured 2 glasses of something from the cabinet in the corner and set one on the table beside her without asking if she wanted it. She didn't look up from the ledger. "You have an inside problem," she said. "This isn't external. Someone with access to both the shipping accounts and the payroll system has been siphoning for." She flipped to the first of her folders. "I can trace it back 22 months for certain, possibly longer, but the records from before that are incomplete." "Who?" he said. "I need 2 more days." He sat down in the chair across from her, picked up his own glass, and waited. That was the thing she noticed about him in those early weeks. He waited. Most men she'd known filled silence with noise, explanations, instructions, complaints. Vane sat with silence like it was a room he was comfortable in, like he'd furnished it himself. "You're not what Gerald described," he said one evening. Mira looked up. "What did Gerald describe?" "Someone quiet." A pause. "Manageable." She laughed, a short sound not particularly warm. "Gerald described the version of me that kept his house running and didn't make trouble. Because making trouble cost energy, I didn't have to spare. That's not the same thing as quiet." Vane looked at her over his glass. "No," he said. "It isn't." On the 11th day, she found the name. It was Corbin, Vane's own logistics coordinator, a man who had been with him for 8 years, who had access to every layer of the financial architecture, who had been routing small amounts through a series of invoices for a rival syndicate, in exchange for what she eventually traced to a standing retainer of $12,000 a month. She put everything in a single folder and set it on the table. When Vane came in at 8 o'clock, she slid it across to him. He opened it, read through it slowly, without expression, turned the pages one by one. When he reached the last page, he closed the folder and set it down. "You're certain?" he said. "The routing confirms it 4 different ways," she said. "The account the payments land in is registered to a shell in Delaware. The Delaware company has 1 director. That director's home address is the same address. Corbin filed with your HR records 4 years ago before he updated it." A long silence. "Corbin has worked for me since I was nobody," Vane said. Not angry, just factual, the way you state a thing that costs something to state. "I know," she said. "I saw the early records. He was the 2nd person on your payroll. You looked at the early records." "I look at everything," she said. "You gave me access. I used it." He stood up, moved to the window. The garden outside was dark. She could see the shape of her own reflection in the glass, the light from the desk lamp making her look washed out and small. "There's more," she said. He turned. "Corbin has been feeding information to Reyes, your primary competitor in the port contracts. But the financial trail goes 1 level deeper." She opened her own copy of the folder and turned to the last 2 pages. 3 of the ghost employees' accounts eventually route through a holding company that has a different director. Not Corbin. Someone who has no listed connection to any of your operations. She pushed the page across. Vane looked at it. His face went very still. "Where did you find this?" he said. "Buried in the incorporation records of the shell. It's a small discrepancy. The registered agent's email domain doesn't match the rest of the paperwork. I traced the domain." He looked at her. "You traced a corporate email domain. It took 2 hours, she said. The rest was public record. The silence between them was different now, not the comfortable kind, the kind that meant something was shifting. "How much of this do you understand?" he said. "What you're looking at? What it means?" Mira set down her pencil. She looked at him directly. This man who had taken her from a kitchen table, who had given her a desk and a problem, and poured her whiskey without asking, and waited in chairs like he had all the time in the world. "I understand that you have a traitor who has been working for a competitor for almost 2 years, she said. I understand that the competitor has someone else inside your organization, someone higher up than Corbin, whose name I now have. I understand that whoever put this together is patient and systematic, which means they're not done. And I understand that you've been bleeding money while this was happening, which means whoever is behind it has been watching your liquidity. She paused. I also understand, she said, that you brought me here to do a job, and I've done it, and I would like to discuss what comes next. Vane looked at her for a long time. What comes next? He repeated. The debt was 80,000, she said. I want to know what it's worth to you, what I just handed you, because I don't think it's worth 80,000. Something happened in his face then. Something she didn't have a name for yet. Not quite amusement, not quite respect. Something older than both. No, he said, it isn't. Corbin was gone within 48 hours. She didn't ask how. She understood that there were mechanisms in Vane's world that operated outside her ledgers, and she had made a decision, early on, not to pretend otherwise. She wasn't innocent about what he was. She had never been required to be innocent about anything. The second name, the one higher up, took another week to resolve. She heard raised voices twice in the hallway outside her office. She kept working. When it was over, Vane came back and told her it was handled, and she nodded and returned to the quarterly figures she'd been restructuring. You didn't ask, he said. I did the part I can do, she said. You did the part I can't. He sat down. She kept working. This had become, without either of them deciding it, the shape of their evenings. The weeks turned into something else. She learned that Vane's real name was Theodore Aldous Vane, that he had built what he had from nothing over 20 years, that he had a brother who was dead and a lawyer who was not, that he ate the same breakfast every morning and read actual printed newspapers and didn't trust anything he couldn't hold in his hand. He learned that she had kept Gerald's house running since she was 15, that she had taught herself double-entry bookkeeping from a library book, because it made her feel like she had a skill that was hers, and no one could take back, that she drank her coffee black and her whiskey neat, and she slept badly in houses where she didn't feel safe. Do you feel safe here? He asked one night. She looked up from the current set of figures. The lamp on the desk was the only light. Outside, the garden was deep November dark. Getting there, she said. He nodded. He didn't smile. She had never seen him smile, not exactly, but something in his face settled, the way a calculation settles when the answer comes out right. The night Gerald showed up was a Thursday. She heard the commotion from the hallway, voices that didn't belong to the house, footsteps that weren't the right weight. She came out of the office and found Gerald in the front entry, being held by two of Vane's men, looking smaller than she remembered. He was wearing the same jacket he'd worn the night he sold her. He'd gained weight around his jaw. Mira, he said. He was trying to sound paternal, which was almost impressive. Baby, listen, I've been thinking. Don't, she said. I didn't have a choice. You have to understand. You had a choice, she said. You've been making choices your entire adult life, and every single one of them has been wrong. That's not an accident, Gerald. That's a pattern. He looked past her, toward the hallway behind her, and she realized he could see Vane standing there. The paternal performance collapsed. What replaced it was the real thing. Fear. I just want to talk, he said. About what? Mira said. The debt is clear. I'm not yours to negotiate with anymore. I haven't been for a while. She looked at the two men holding him. She looked back at Gerald. Take him back to wherever he came from, she said. Don't let him through the gate again. She went back to her office. Vane appeared in the doorway 10 minutes later. You didn't want to hear what he had to say, he asked. I know everything Gerald has to say, she said. I lived with it for 12 years. There's nothing new in there. He was quiet for a moment. You handled that. I've been handling Gerald since I was 15, she said. He doesn't get harder. She looked up. He was watching her with that particular expression she'd started to recognize, the one that meant he was seeing something he hadn't expected when he looked at her. What? She said. Nothing, he said, but he stayed in the doorway. The conversation about what they were to each other happened in January, which surprised her. Not the conversation itself, but the month. She'd expected winter to feel precarious, full of uncertainty. Instead, it felt like the only solid ground she'd stood on in years. They were at the desk, his desk now, because somewhere in December she had started using the large office more than the small one, and he had moved papers to make room without commenting on it. She had a stack of quarterly reports. He had a phone call he'd been putting off and eventually just didn't make. "The debt's been clear for 2 months," he said. "I know. You haven't left. I know that too." He looked at her. "Is that something you want to discuss?" She set down her pen. She thought about the house she'd grown up in, the yellow legal pad on the kitchen table, the $43 in the checking account, the 31 years of making herself as small as possible so nobody noticed enough to send her away. She thought about the first morning she'd woken up in this house and felt, for no rational reason, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. "I want to stay," she said, "if that's an option." Vane set down whatever he'd been holding. He looked at her for a long time, the way he looked at numbers, carefully, checking for error. "It's an option," he said. "I'd want a title," she said. "Not wife, not whatever the word is for what I was brought here as. Something real. Something with actual authority. Chief Financial Officer is a real title," he said. "I was thinking something with more personal implications." A pause. Something shifted in his face. That thing she still didn't quite have a name for. "I was also thinking something with more personal implications," he said. She picked up her pen. He went back to the papers he'd been pretending to read. The lamp was warm, and the garden outside had snow on it, and the house made the specific sound of a house that is inhabited by people who have decided to stay. She did not become his wife because she was sold to him. She became his wife because she stayed when the debt was gone. Because she made herself indispensable not through obedience, but through competence. Because she walked into his world with nothing but a yellow legal pad and a pencil, and a refusal to be manageable, and she rebuilt his finances so cleanly that he found the leak that had been bleeding him for 2 years. And then she handed him the evidence and asked what it was worth, and he didn't insult her by pretending the answer was small. The wedding was quiet. A judge, a room, 2 witnesses. Pesha cried. Vane did not, but his hand when he signed the document was still for longer than usual. The way a man is still when he is feeling something he doesn't have a name for yet. Gerald got a letter, not from Mira, she had nothing to say to him, but from Vane's lawyer, detailing, in precise and formal language, the various ways in which Gerald's remaining business interests would become significantly more complicated if he made contact again. She didn't ask what was in the letter. She trusted the numbers. The woman who had sat at a kitchen table at 11:43 at night, running someone else's accounts in the dark, waiting for something she wasn't even sure she believed in. That woman was not gone. Mira knew better than to think survival burned the old self away. You carried it forward, all of it, the ledger pads and the $43 and the years of silence. You just stopped being the only one who knew what you were worth now. Vane knew. He'd known from the first spreadsheet, the first folder, the first night she looked up from the numbers and told him exactly what they said and what they meant and what he had to do about it. Some debts aren't paid in money. She sat at her desk, the wide, dark one she'd taken over in December, and opened the morning reports, and the house was warm, and the snow on the garden was bright in the early light, and the door to everything that had come before was closed and latched, and she had been the one to close it.